The House will be in order. The Chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., October 29, 2013. I hereby appoint the Honorable Chris Collins to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to the order of the House of January 3, 2013, the Chair will now recognize members from lists submitted by the majority and minority leaders for morning hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with each party limited to 1 hour, and each member other than the majority and minority leaders and minority whip limited to 5 minutes each. But in no event shall debate continue beyond 11:50 a.m. The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Sniff, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, for nearly 3 years, the Arab Middle East, an enormous arc stretching from the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean, has been in turmoil. Restive millions, frustrated by a lack of economic opportunity, repressive politics, and a social structure often at odds with modernity, have taken to the streets demanding change. Their revolution hangs in the balance with the entrenched interests of the former regimes on the one side and the stultifying religious rule on the other. Faced with these daunting realities, the Obama administration may be in the midst of a strategic reevaluation of our role in the region, one that is far more modest in ambition, more tempered in expectation, and certainly more reliant on the use of its diplomatic, not military resources. This new approach stands in stark contrast to the effort by the George W. Bush administration to deliver a freedom agenda, sometimes through the barrel of a gun, that would bring democracy to a region that has known mostly misrule. That doctrine or its application proved entirely unworkable, as the societies freed of their authoritarian shackles had nothing upon which to build. This is a lesson we may be bitterly relearning in Libya as well. These setbacks and the realization that democracy building is a generational undertaking must not lead us to disengage from the region. The forces freed by the Arab Spring will not be contained, and I still believe they can lead hundreds of millions of people to more representative forms of government, more economic opportunity, and, we must hope, more tranquility and peace within their borders. The United States needs to help build institutions capable of supporting a transition in the Arab world in 3 dimensions: political, economic, and civil society. Unmet economic needs are the most pressing. At its heart, the Arab Spring is the expression of discontent of millions of idle young Arabs who have seen the economic opportunities that the outside world offers, but whose own economic realities are plagued by stagnation, mismanagement, and cronyism. The cure is not outright assistance, which will do little to unleash or occupy long-term the energies of the Arab youth. It is investment that will allow this generation of Arabs to drag inefficient, antiquated, and highly statist economies into the 21st century. Since the ouster of Ben Ali and Mubarak, I have pushed for the creation of enterprise funds and other nimble vehicles that will allow us to direct resources at specific sectors that can help drive economic growth, as well as improve the quality of life for ordinary people. In coming years, these economies will need to produce sufficient jobs and wealth to both sustain workers and their families and to provide the economic conditions for sustainable political stability. But that cannot be an excuse to put off political reform now, because capital flows will not resume until investors have some confidence that their money is safe. The experiences of both Egypt and Tunisia serve to reinforce the inchoate nature of their political transitions. Both countries emerged from their respective revolutions with energized Islamist movements that were able to triumph over less well-organized secular parties, in large measure because the old governments had atomized their opposition and left political Islamist governments as the only viable alternative. And in both countries, this experiment failed as a result of overreaching and a misreading of the people's wishes, a development that should ease the fears of those who see a green wave sweeping across the Middle East. The dysfunction in both Cairo and Tunis and the Egyptian military's deposing of President Mohamed Morsi in a coup are a reminder that a democratic outcome is never assured or to be assumed. The United States must stand ready to assist Arab nations with a long-term institution building and political spadework that are necessary preconditions for democracy. In Tunisia, which is small, relatively prosperous, and not nearly as divided as some of its larger neighbors, prospects for a peaceful transition and transfer of power from the current Islamist government to a technocratic government that would oversee elections are alive, if not entirely well. But while a framework for the installation of a caretaker government remains, squabbling between the Islamists and the secular opposition has slowed the progress and reintroduced uncertainty into Tunisia's fragile politics. Political institution building and creating a culture of good governance will require targeted assistance, training programs, and a lot of patience. Egypt and Tunisia may be a mess now, but in 10 years from now will not be the same as they are today, and we can play a role in helping to shape that future. Think of some of the other countries that have democratized in recent years in Eastern Europe, Asia, and Latin America. The transitions have not been quick or smooth, and many of them are still ongoing. Amid the euphoria that accompanied the collapse of the communist bloc in Eastern Europe, we were tempted to believe we were all witnesses to the end of history, as one academic put it. The reality
has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Jones, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. At this point in our nation's history, I believe both parties will acknowledge that we have major economic issues facing our country. As Congress just recently came to a temporary resolution which raised the debt ceiling by $230 billion, it is incredible to me that we still found $30 billion in aid to send to Afghanistan and $1.6 billion in aid to send to Pakistan. Mr. Speaker, at a time when America is drowning in debt, this is completely unacceptable. And even more important than the money are the American lives that have been lost. 6 in the time the government was shut down and 1 the weekend after. As we work to fix our national problems, we should be wise enough to follow the lead of the nations who have interfered in Afghanistan before us. England and Russia are only 2 examples. And stop wasting lives, money on a country that will never change. History tells us that it is time to bring our troops home. I want to thank ABC News for their effort each Sunday morning during the week with George Stephanopoulos to faithfully list the names of the Americans who have been killed in Afghanistan, just as they did during the Iraq War. It is with sadness that I report that they have added 7 names to this list over the last 3 weeks. Mr. Speaker, on the poster beside me are the faces of 2 little girls, Stephanie and Eden, whose father, Sergeant Kevin Baldy from Camp Lejeune Marine Base, which is in my district, was killed in Afghanistan. He and Colonel Palmer from Cherry Point Marine Air Station, also in my district, were trying to train the Afghans to be policemen. One of the trainees turned their pistol on Palmer and Baldy and killed both of them. So these little girls are standing at Arlington with their mama holding their hands. Perhaps more disheartening is the fact that 2 of the most recent deaths in Afghanistan also were example of Afghans killed that we were trying to train, killing Americans who were trying to help them. Mr. Speaker, a few weeks ago I spoke on the floor about an article I read titled The Forgotten War by Ann Jones. Now I would like to submit for the record an article written by an Iraq War veteran named Jael Ahiram, who now attends the University of Southern California, which he entitled Afghan War Must End Immediately. I ask unanimous consent that I might submit this for the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, both of these articles hold the same conclusion. The war in Afghanistan is a misuse of American youth, American money, and American military power. It is time for the Congress of the United States to face the fact that we have our own problems here in America. To send money, over $600 billion to Afghanistan, to build roads, schools, utility plants so the Taliban can blow them up, that makes no sense. It is time for little girls like these two to have their daddies at home and not have their daddies in a coffin. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you for this opportunity.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Matsui, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a member of SEEK, the House Sustainable Energy and Environment Coalition, I rise today to recognize the one-year anniversary of Superstorm Sandy. Today, we remember those who lost their lives during this catastrophe and salute those who continue the rebuilding efforts. 1 year ago, Sandy ravaged the East Coast, producing devastating floods and widespread power outages, disrupting cellular phone networks and transit systems. As a whole, the region suffered over $65 billion in economic losses. Families lost their homes, their precious mementos and reminders of their daily lives. Communities lost their businesses, and tragically, some individuals lost their lives. While the East Coast was a primary victim of Sandy, extreme weather knows no boundaries, and other communities around our country are not immune from suffering the same fate. Floods, hurricanes, wildfires, and droughts are becoming all too common, all too intense, and all too costly. These events will continue to wreak economic havoc and uproot families unless we take meaningful action to address climate change. In California, climate change is increasing the frequency of extreme heat and prolonged drought, placing millions of Californians at greater risk of public health threats such as heat-related sickness, forest fires, and water scarcity. At home, my constituents live under the constant threat of flooding, which is why I work relentlessly to strengthen our levees and upgrade our infrastructure. If extreme weather caused a levee to be breached in Sacramento, the damage would be similar to that experienced in New Orleans. Mr. Speaker, events like Sandy can happen anywhere. They don't just threaten the coasts, but all communities in all states. Events like Sandy can happen at any time and are happening with alarming frequency. This was not an isolated event that happens every decade. We cannot continue to sit back and wait for the next disaster to happen before we take action. The time to act is not a year from now, not a month from now, not even a day from now. The time to act is today. We must implement preventative measures to make our communities more resilient and be proactive in addressing climate change, the root cause of extreme weather events. Only then will we be able to safeguard the country from the destructive effects of extreme weather and ensure that the legacy of Sandy is one of action and not despair and procrastination. I yield back. Thank you.
Gentlewoman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, over the past few weeks, it's become obvious that we are watching nothing less than the collapse of the American health care system. Millions of Americans are losing their health plans and set adrift into a dysfunctional system where they cannot find comparable, affordable policies. Few are signing up on the Obamacare exchanges. How few, we don't know, because the numbers are so embarrassing the administration refuses to report them. There are published reports that some 80% of the sign-ups are pushed into the Medicaid system, which is itself nearing functional collapse as doctors simply opt out. Those who are able to keep their health plans are seeing their rates skyrocket to unaffordable extremes. Those few who can find affordable policies often discover they're losing their doctors. Many employers are dropping their employee health plans or reducing salaries or cutting back on work hours or laying off workers trying to cope with increased costs. A constituent of mine reports her employer cut her salary 23% as it tries to cope with Obamacare costs. The Obamacare website is a monument to governmental incompetence. This is a website designed to sell a single product that's been under development for more than 3 years at a taxpayer cost of more than $600 million, more than was spent developing Facebook or Twitter, and it does not work. But that's not the big problem. The big problem is that today there are fewer people with health insurance, apparently a lot fewer, than before this program began less than 1 month ago. This is the disaster that Republicans tried to prevent, or at least to delay. But that disaster is now unfolding before our eyes with dire consequences for millions of Americans. With all its flaws, the American health care system was the finest in the world. It was the most innovative, the most advanced, the most adaptable, and the most responsive to the individual needs of patients. And now we are losing it. The one question I keep hearing is, well, what do the Republicans propose? Well, in fact, Republicans have had a comprehensive alternative for years, spearheaded by Dr. Tom Price of Georgia and Dr. Phil Rowe of Tennessee, and sponsored by the Republican Study Committee. This package would bring within the reach of every American a health plan that they could choose according to their own individual needs of their own families, that they could own and that they could control. But this package has never passed the House, and it's high time that it did. It extends the same tax breaks we currently give to companies to employees so they can afford to buy their own health care again according to their own needs. It expands health savings accounts so people can meet their needs with pre-tax income. It restores to people the freedom to shop across state lines to find the best policies to suit their needs. It restores flexibility so that health plans can accommodate people with pre-existing conditions while expanding risk pools to provide for those conditions. It attacks cost drivers like medical liability law that are making health care unaffordable. It restores pricing flexibility to plans so that a healthy young person can again purchase catastrophic insurance for next to nothing. It takes the best of the American health care system, preserves it, and corrects its flaws. Now, I realize the Senate's likely to bury this reform as it has so many, but it's important that the House pass it so that the American people can see that there is still hope to save what was once the finest health care system in the world and can be again as soon as this fever dream of Obamacare finally breaks. We have just been through a government shutdown because Democrats refused even to consider delaying the Obamacare train wreck. Well, they got their way, and that train wreck is now upon us. I believe in coming months, the American people will recognize the urgent warnings that the Republicans tried so desperately to convey, and they'll be looking for a way out. We need to blaze that trail now, and for that reason, I rise to ask the House leadership to bring the Republican health care reforms to the floor, get them to the Senate, and then let the American people decide. Mr. Speaker, freedom works. It's time we put it back to work. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I started my day with my friend and colleague, Dr. Phil Rowe, Republican congressman from Tennessee. We met with representatives from the American Academy of Hospice and Palliative Medicine. These dedicated professionals deal with helping patients and their families contend with some of the most difficult circumstances any of us will ever face. Loved ones in pain with difficult medical conditions at the end of life. We were discussing legislation that Dr. Rowe and I have co-sponsored, the Personalize Your Health Care Act of 2013, H.R. 1173. Despite widespread agreement in principle that individuals should be fully involved with decisions related to their health care, too often this is not the reality. Most adults have not completed an advance directive. If documents are completed, they are not regularly revisited and can be difficult to locate when needed. Because these issues are difficult to discuss, often surrogates feel ill-prepared to interpret their loved one's written wishes. These shortcomings leave families and healthcare proxies faced with the burden of determining their loved one's wishes in the midst of crisis, adding greater stress and anxiety. One of the great misconceptions about advanced care planning is that it's a one-time event. Attempting to plan for all the possibilities in a single document or within a single conversation is both overwhelming and impossible. For advanced care planning to be successful, it must become less about legal documentation and more about facilitating ongoing communication about the future care wishes among individuals, their health care providers, and their families. This approach recognizes that documents like advance directives and physician orders for life-sustaining treatment are not the ends, but the means, the tools for documenting care preferences based on informed decisions that incorporate an individual's values, personal goals, and current circumstance. This process not only provides higher quality care, but personalized care. This is the right time to embrace this simple, common-sense reform. I stepped out of a hearing going on in Ways and Means about the Affordable Care Act, which has basically become a contest, an ongoing soap opera, not an effort to fix the expensive health care system that too often delivers mediocre results, but instead use it as a political tug-of-war. The Personalize Your Health Care Act is a way out of this cul-de-sac. It's a way that we can come together to empower families to know what they face, understand their choices, make their wishes known, and assure their wishes are respected. I strongly urge my colleagues to join Dr. Rowe and me to co-sponsor H.R. 1173, Personalize Your Care Act, and work with us to guarantee this important protection for all of American families.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Poe, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, the administration puts forward a false choice between the liberties we cherish and the security we provide. No more illegal wiretapping of citizens. No more ignoring the law when it's convenient. That is not who we are. That is not what is necessary to defeat the terrorists. We will again set an example for the world that the law is not subject to the whims of stubborn rulers and that justice is not arbitrary. This administration acts like violating civil liberties is the way to enhance our own security. It's not. Mr. Speaker, those are the words of Senator Barack Obama in 2007. But that was then, this is now. The NSA, the National Spy Agency as I call it, is continuing its stealth intrusion into the lives of not only Americans but foreign leaders as well that Senator Obama once talked about. The NSA has been caught eavesdropping on the Germans, the French, and now news reports say 60 million phone calls in Spain were monitored by NSA. A bit more history about the NSA and their spying. The Department of Justice stealthily seized information from 20 different Associated Press reporters or press phone lines, including some in the U.S. Capitol, right up there. The Department of Justice stealthily seized phone records of Fox News reporter James Rosen, his parents, and several Fox News phone lines. In the month of January of 2013 alone, 125 billion phone calls were monitored worldwide, and at least 3 billion of them were phone calls in America. The NSA stealthily seized from Verizon Business Network services millions of telephone records, including the location, numbers, and time of domestic calls. A secret government program called PRISM allowed the NSA to search photos, emails, and documents from computers at Apple, Google, and Microsoft, among many other Internet sources. NSA and the Snoop and Spy Caucus say this spying on Americans and our allies is necessary to catch the terrorists. They even claim a terrorist attacks have been prevented. Well, if this is true, show the evidence. Prove it. Where are the terrorists that are supposedly had been thwarted by these surveillance tendencies? And even if it is true, which I doubt, it still violates the law. In my opinion, it violates the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act doesn't allow for this nonsense. It violates the constitutional right of privacy, Mr. Speaker. It violates the Fourth Amendment and the right of persons to be secure in their homes, papers, and effects without government intrusion. Government cannot use the old Soviet-style dragnet approach, hoping to catch a big fish while also catching the endangered species of freedom. Those who argue otherwise say they must seize the whole haystack to find the needle in the haystack. Well, Mr. Speaker, that is exactly what is prevented in the Fourth Amendment. I would like to quote the Fourth Amendment. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. No warrant shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. The Fourth Amendment specifically prohibits government from seizing the whole haystack to find the one needle. Mr. Speaker, the American people have lost trust in government. It's time for Congress to intervene to prevent the invasion of privacy by government against the citizens. The federal government must stop redlining the Fourth Amendment. According to the administration official, the President did not sign off on this stuff and was unaware of the depth of the surveillance of foreign leaders. Well, who did sign off? Mr. Speaker, is there a shadow government in America that operates outside the law, outside the knowledge of the administration? Sort of spooky, isn't it, Mr. Speaker? Technology may change, but the Constitution does not. We cannot have security, we can have security, but not at the cost of losing individual freedom. Because, to quote the constitutional law professor, there should be no choice between the liberties we cherish and the security we provide. And that's just the way it is. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Ohio, Mrs. Kapoor, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, Politico recently reported that the U.S. Trade Representative Michael Froman is pressing for another trade bill as soon as possible. This one called the Trans-Pacific Partnership, signed with Asian-Pacific countries, about a dozen of them. But whether it's the Obama administration, the Bush first or Bush second administration, or the Clinton administration, the executive branch continues to push the same old failed trade model that puts foreign involvements and multinational interests ahead of America's workers and America's businesses. In fact, these deals have cost America millions and millions of jobs as our trade deficit continues to get worse. This is particularly disturbing, this proposal for a new trade deal, because if you look at the results of the first Obama administration trade deal, the Korean deal, you'll see that proof is in the pudding that things didn't get better, they actually got worse. We were told with the Korean free trade deal that America would create 70,000 jobs here at home. Guess what? The fact is, in reality, with the Korean free trade deal, America's lost another 40,000 jobs as a result of that agreement alone. That's about 4,000 jobs lost each month because of the Korean free trade deal. We were promised with the Korean deal that our economy would grow through increased exports by $10 to $11 billion. Well, guess what? In reality, U.S. exports to Korea have actually declined by roughly $800 million since the agreement took effect. Yes, that's a 20% decline. That translates into lost jobs and lost income. America was told if we signed the Korean trade agreement that actually our trade deficit would shrink. Well, guess what? The month the Korean trade agreement took effect, the U.S. trade deficit with Korea was $564 billion. It's nearly tripled to $1.6 billion, adding to this sea of red trade deficit ink. We were told that America would actually level the playing field in the field of automotive trade if we passed the Korean free trade deal. I didn't vote for it, but guess what? Since the Korean agreement took effect, U.S. exports of motor vehicles to Korea have gone up monthly by, guess what, how much? 44 cars. 44 cars. That's it. At the same time, guess how many more cars the Koreans are shipping in here? 20,000. All told, Korea has imported more than 1.5 million motor vehicles to the United States. These are the big red bars here, since the agreement took effect. Meanwhile, we have only exported 34,000. 34,000. That's a 44-to-1 advantage on Korea's side. That doesn't sound like an agreement that's working to me. Why model the new TPP on that agreement? It isn't working. The sad thing is the American people have been told these same free trade agreements for the past century, past quarter century. All the lies that are contained in them have resulted in a sea of red ink that is costing us jobs. It's no surprise we have a $17 trillion budget deficit when you have a $9 trillion accumulated trade deficit over the last 25 years. Mr. Speaker, it's time for Congress to stop these bad trade deals. Focus on creating jobs inside our country. I call on Republican leaders to sideline the Trans-Pacific Partnership deal, bring up my bill, H.R. 192, the Balancing Trade Act, as a start. This legislation would require the administration to outline actions to balance the trade deficit with every single country that we have a trade deficit with, including Korea, country by country. America can then again begin to create jobs in this country at a level that the American people expect, a vibrant economy here at home, and grow our middle class forward, not backward. Mr. Speaker, I yield back my remaining time.
The gentlewoman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the American people have come all too accustomed to government glitches, which result largely from government that has grown too large, too bureaucratic, and too difficult to navigate. Every day, with a dedicated and compassionate staff, I assist constituents in navigating the frustrating and challenging bureaucracy of the federal government. On a daily basis, we attempt to problem-solve issues that citizens face when seeking resolution on issues with federal agencies. Agencies such as the Internal Revenue Service, the Environmental Protection Agency, Veterans Affairs, or FEMA, just to name just a few. The frustrations and difficulties created as unintended consequences of the Affordable Care Act have dramatically expanded how large and damaging government glitches can be. The website glitches are just icing on the cake. For over the last several years, the broken promises have continued to mount. One of the more glaring broken promises was reported yesterday when Americans found out they won't be able to keep the plan they have, despite what the President has been telling us. Yesterday, NBC News aired a report that sources involved in the Affordable Care Act have admitted, and I quote, that 50 to 75% of the 14 million consumers who buy their insurance individually can expect to receive a cancellation letter or the equivalent over the next year because their existing policies don't meet the standards mandated by the new health care law, end quote. One expert was reported as predicting that the number could reach as high as 80%. Of the 4 NBC sources said that many of those forced to buy pricier new policies will experience, and I quote, sticker shock. While millions of Americans are being shocked by cancellation letters for their health insurance, the Obama administration has known of this government glitch for at least 3 years. Mr. Speaker, the so-called Affordable Care Act has been anything but affordable. Prices continue to rise on insurance premiums, and the cost of care nationally continues to go up. Mr. Speaker, this law has intended to expand access and quality. Yet in Pennsylvania, children are being forced out of the Children's Health Insurance Program, commonly known as PA-CHIP, and into medical assistance. CHIP is serving our kids adequately through commercial products that are widely accepted by physicians. It's low-cost, market-based health insurance coverage. Moving these kids onto Medicaid has the potential to dramatically limit access to care. Given the mounting evidence of glitches in Obamacare's rollout, affordability, and individual choice, you have to wonder about what the future holds. From the missed deadlines, delays, and special waivers to now website crashes and Americans losing the plans they have, the outcomes we are encountering with this law are completely unacceptable. Mr. Speaker, it is time for the administration to delay and fix all these glitches that are so evident in the Affordable Care Act. It's time for the Obama administration to do the right thing. The American people deserve as much. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Honda, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, let me just be a little uplifting today. I rise today to wish my friends and colleagues a happy Diwali. Diwali is this Sunday, November 3rd, and it signifies the start of the Lunar New Year. The festival of Diwali is a rich cultural history. It celebrates the victory of good over evil, light over darkness, and knowledge over ignorance. Diwali is one of the biggest festivals for Hindus, celebrated with great enthusiasm and happiness. The festival is celebrated for 5 continuous days, where the 3rd day is celebrated as the main Diwali festival, or Festival of Lights. This holiday commemorates Lord Rama's return from 14 years of exile after defeating the demon King Ravan. Different colorful varieties of fireworks are always associated with this festival. People shoot firecrackers to drive away evil spirits. On this auspicious day, people light up diyas, lamps, and candles all around their house. These lamps are kept on during the night, and people clean their houses to welcome Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth, into their homes. Lakshmi is said to bring prosperity and happiness to people in the new year. During Diwali, all the celebrants wear new clothes and share sweets and snacks with family members and friends. They perform a ceremonial puja in the evening and seek divine blessings from Lakshmi. The festival of Diwali is never complete without exchange of gifts. People present Diwali gifts to all near dear ones. Diwali is an official holiday in India, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Mauritius, Guyana, Trinidad, Tobago, Suriname, Malaysia, Singapore, and Fiji. This holiday is one of the most important holidays in Indian culture and a time for families to reunite and enjoy one another's company. I ask my colleagues to join me in the celebration of Diwali, the Festival of Lights. Happy Diwali.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Harper, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize the craftsmanship of George Berry Sr. George's life has been dedicated to wood carving. This interest began at a young age and developed into a lifelong pursuit. And his artwork displays a passion for nature, particularly the wildlife of Mississippi. George has not only been committed to his art, but also to sharing his gifts through teaching. He has become an important fixture within the local art community in Mississippi, and he has been recognized both within this community and outside of it with several distinguished awards. Through his passion for art and education, George Berry Sr. has made a tremendous impact on many Mississippians and others throughout this country. George was born in Veneta, Oklahoma, and at the age of 6, George was taught wood carving by his father. He moved to Mississippi in 1972 to teach industrial arts at the Piney Woods School, a historically African-American school located in Rankin County, Mississippi. A year later, he became a charter member of the Craftsmen's Guild of Mississippi, a program created to promote folk art within the state. After retiring from Piney Woods in 1984, George Berry has dedicated a majority of his time to wood carving. Even so, he continues to spend a great deal of his time teaching others. George teaches weekly classes for the Mississippi Craftsmen's Guild and frequently instructs students at the Allison Wells School of Arts and Crafts in Canton, Mississippi. Additionally, he has taught at the John C. Campbell Folk School in Brasstown, North Carolina. George Berry's preference and style is reflected in his large body of work. His realistic depictions of nature are the constant theme in his artwork. In particular, many of his wood pieces represent Mississippi wildlife with works such as catfish, deer, and hunting dogs. Beautiful sculptures of leaves and birds are other staples of his artwork. His skillful craft is a demonstration of the grace and rustic beauty that is found in nature. This Mississippi craftsman has been recognized with many awards and honors. George Berry received a Folk Artist Fellowship from the Mississippi Arts Commission in 1999, and in 2002 he was presented with the prestigious Governor's Award for Excellence in the Arts. The Craftsman's Guild of Mississippi awarded him with their Lifetime Achievement Award in 2009. And on October the 18th of this year, I had the privilege of speaking at the celebration of the opening of the George Berry Senior Gallery at the Craftsman's Guild of Mississippi, joining hundreds of family and friends in honoring George. In addition to these awards, George Berry's work has been on display at several major festivals, including the Mississippi Arts Festival, Festival USA on the Strand, the Festival of Pennsylvania Folklife Bicentennial, and the Mississippi Pavilion at the World's Fair. His carved wood sculptures are on exhibits in a number of museums, including the Old Capitol Museum in Jackson, Mississippi, and the Museum of Natural Science. George has been featured in many national and regional publications such as Southern Living and Mississippi Outdoors. These many accolades are a testament to this gifted artist. So again, on behalf of the House of Representatives, I would like to congratulate and recognize Mr. George Berry Sr. on his achievements as both an artist and as a teacher. For more than 50 years, George has used his God-given gift as a skillful craftsman to make beautiful pieces of art. Again, and today, he continues to graciously share his knowledge and skill with many others. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until noon today.
The House returns at noon Eastern for legislative work. Along with a handful of land bills, lawmakers will take up two other measures. One deals with the authority of the Labor Department to issue rules for financial investment advisor. The other, a resolution disapproving of the debt limit increase passed by Congress on October 16th. If passed, it would prevent further borrowing by the Treasury Department. Votes scheduled throughout the